how do you feel about, one of the things that we do in software development today that's, different is we do, very short cycles. It's more an iterative process. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the challenges that we've talked about quite a bit as a group is that government programs aren't designed to iterate. So, do you have any thoughts around that? Do you see possibilities there?
So, iteration is so key to get to success. And you are right. Government is, our iterative intervals are not always short. A lot of that is, I'm going to give government a buy and say a lot of that is by design. Again, going back to that inherently risk-averse nature of government. At the same time, it is useful to be able to change course. It's like turning an aircraft carrier. It just takes a lot of time to have government course corrections. That said, on a program level or even on a project level, those are things, iteration is probably very key. And USAID is probably more nimble than most federal government agencies in the sense that we have to be good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. Yes, the American people are generous in spirit and in opening up their pocketbooks, but at the same time, we are cognizant of the fact that we're spending your dollars, and we want to do it as well as possible. So it is important for us to be able to shift course. Part of that is done on the front end. So when you look at large procurements, for example, that come out of USAID, there's a lot that goes into planning those procurements. Sometimes we course correct because Congress says, well, we're hearing from our constituents that you're doing X, Y, and Z in a way that could be done better. And that's fair criticism, and we'll go in and look and see where there are ways that we can do something better. I don't want to be a doubting Thomas and say that government is never going to change. I think that government is responsive. It's slowly responsive, but it is responsive. AID has that capacity to be faster, because also the populations that we're working with frequently need that far more rapid response. The other thing that we're doing is engaging more and more with the private sector. The idea behind our private sector engagement strategy is to turn, open the doors and say, we don't have all of the solutions. We don't have the best solutions. We need to partner with the private sector to come up with what are those better solutions. We need to create with you, bringing in each side's expertise to say, hey, this is a cool way of doing this. We did it this way in this government agency or in this country. Let's try to see if this is a solution that might work at USAID. We've started this thing called Grand Challenges coming out of the Global Development Lab. And these are wildly popular with Congress conceptually, but they've also been extremely helpful to us. They bring in solution ideas that we would never in-house necessarily have thought of. And they also bring in new partners to us, new companies with whom we haven't worked in the past. Premise came to us through a challenge, the Zika Grand Challenge. These are ways that we're able to open the doors to try new innovations in a way that we can't predict. We'll say, We want to have a grand challenge on the subject of water. How do we make best use of limited water resources? That could be the way that one company interprets that. How do we make water, how do we pull water out of the air? That could be another solution. We don't know what the solutions will look like, and that's the excitement for us behind the idea of a grand challenge. These are things that we do come up with and we do get funding for in advance of launching them. And soon we'll be able to launch another one around Venezuela. And what are some of the solutions, and I put that out to you in advance, what are some of the solutions for solving these problems that we're going to be looking at when Venezuela transitions? How do we serve the people of Venezuela, as well as potentially the countries in the region who have been taking in massive numbers of Venezuelan refugees, migrants, people who are not where they should be, not in their homes. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Absolutely,
or not.
that was great. But what I want to do now is open it up to the room and let. So I'm not asking all the questions.
Good.
We'll let some other people ask some questions. So, question for Bonnie. Hold your hand. We got a very shy group in here.
I can't believe that. Here.
Deputy Glick, oh, is this on?
Nope.
Deputy Glick, thank you so much for your comments. My name is Vivian Ranson. I sit with the Global Development Lab. I wanted to raise an interesting comment to you. It was a quote from Chris Watson just earlier this morning, and he talked about a quote that increasingly development programs are making plans for the real world and plans for the digital world, that they're doing both. And I think the lab would say, and probably many other innovators in the agency who don't sit within the lab, that the real world is a digital world.
Yes.
And it increasingly doesn't make sense to plan separately because the physical and digital worlds are so deeply integrated. From your comments, I presume you agree with that. What do you think are the biggest changes that the agency will make in that direction to move toward that view?
That is a terrific question. The real world is the digital world, and anybody who doesn't realize that is living in the 20th century. I think one of the keys for us at USAID is to be able to integrate the digital world into all of our programming. And so whether that is distribution of food assistance or technical capacity building, it's going to be a digital solution in some form or fashion. And so much of that is related to the data that's gathered in that. When you're delivering food, you need to know how much you're delivering, where, and how much too is potentially not going to beneficiaries, but instead being siphoned off in inappropriate ways. That's kind of on the downer side of it, but it is reality, and it's something that we have to think about. But I think thinking further, the challenges that we face are really around the fact that we don't know what we don't know. And I say this openly, we do not have all of the solutions. We need those solutions to be generated from the outside and brought to us with, how abouts. How about you think about doing this in Syria, where you have a large refugee population? How about you think about doing this in the Bahamas, where you just had a hurricane? I think about countries, too, that are not quite brought up in the digital revolution and how we bring them along. So I had a conversation a while ago with a bunch of foreign ministers from the Caribbean, and we were talking pre-hurricane season about 5G. And one of the ministers said to me, you know, my ICT ministry is 2 people. It's not 2 engineers and 2 guys who are going to put up the poles and 2 of anything. It's 2 people in the ministry, which means probably 1 minister and 1 guy who actually has to do everything. So that's not a lot. And when he said to me, I'm stuck because I'd really like eventually to get to 5G. On a good day, we're at 3G. On a bad day, we're at 0G. That would be during hurricane season. If the Chinese government were to come to us and say, here's a plug-and-play solution, just take it, sign on the dotted line, don't read the fine print, and it's hard for me to say no to that. And I scratched my head and thought, well, you know, we're here to make it easier for you to weigh the options that are available to you. And one of the things that we can do is help to train your workforce, help your workforce develop into a digital workforce, one that has a population that's trained in digital technology, in telco technology, communications broadly, and then have you work in your own country with ways to create job opportunities for those young people so that they don't look for other markets into which they can apply their skills. And I think that's a way that it's really important for us to recognize that we're all walking around with a smartphone. Everyone in the world aspires to be that person walking around with a smartphone. And the more that we can do to enable that and to recognize that that is, of course, it's not a Huawei cell phone, but the more we can do to enable that for citizens around the world, the better off they'll be and the more developed their countries will be, the more emergent.
Question?
Hi. My name is Travis Mayo. I'm also from USAID, the Bureau for Policy Planning and Learning. And thank you, Deputy Administrator Glick, for being here today and also for bringing your leadership and skills back to government service. Thank you. You know, I completely agree with you that USAID does a great job of having, under this leadership, having a high risk tolerance for using technology and innovation in our programming, and making sure that the development solutions we're putting out to the world are cutting edge and trying new things. And I'm really proud to work at USAID because we do that really well. And it's not just out of the lab. There's offices in the technical and regional bureaus as well that really focus on innovation and have that as part of their mandate. Where I see one of the biggest barriers to really utilizing what we're learning and also utilizing technology and keeping up with industry is actually more of our internal processes, our personnel systems, our systems for management and strategy. And in those areas, we have a lot lower risk tolerance for making changes and putting expectations on leadership of different operating units on what we expect out of them to be bringing down to their staff on how we use data and technology. And so my question is, to what degree do you see the journey to self-reliance and the objectives and principles coming out of that as an incentive or as a means for accelerating internal change and how we really can harness technology and bring it into our staff?
That's a great question, and I promise that the next question that's asked will be asked by someone who's not from USAID. But Travis, thank you. It's a good question, and it's, I think, a critical question for the USAID of the future, because a U.S. government agency that has a mission like USAID's is very appealing to young people, but it then becomes something that's quickly unappealing on some levels when they walk in the door and they're just dumbfounded by the levels of bureaucracy. One of the things that Mark Green, the USAID administrator, and I have tried to do is flatten some of those structures within USAID to make the bureaucracy function a little bit better. But it is still a bureaucracy. And on some level, there's no getting around it. The speed thing is something that we're really working hard on, trust me, of getting, being responsive to the workforce itself is really important for workforce retention. People believe in what we do, but when they're hampered on a daily basis by the reasons why we can't do something as opposed to the reasons why we can, it becomes discouraging. USAID is in the process of what we call a transformation. We're reorganizing the agency to be more in line with a 21st century operation than a 20th century operation. When President Trump was elected, one of the things that he mandated all of the cabinet secretaries to do was look for ways to improve performance in agencies writ large. Some of the agencies took that mandate to be, I don't know, I'll joke and say order pencils more frequently. But USAID took it extremely seriously because we looked at the environment in which we were operating and saw that the world has changed from the USAID of 60 years ago to the USAID of today. And while we've done changes at the margins over the course of the decades, it probably was worthwhile taking a wholesale look at the agency and how it's structured in order to make it more adaptable to the 21st century. I think we're getting there. Again, as with all things in government, it's slower than we might like. But I think with new bureaus and new orientations and new tools available to us, I do think that we'll get there in shorter order than has been done in the past. Although short order is not necessarily as fast as some people might like.
Okay, one more.
And you can only ask a question if you're not from aid.
Okay, I'm taking the challenge. I'm not from USAID. Alfredo Fort at the health unit at IBTCI. And
please tell me what IBTCI stands for.
It's one of the sponsor agencies, International Business and Technical Consultants. And I wanted to ask you, it's a bit tricky, I think, but when we talk about the data revolution, and you mentioned this, that you might find in a particular government that they have only 2 people in their IT department. But on the other hand, we are seeing, relative development, even in some of these emerging countries or developing countries that are low, income, middle income. And so, how do you see that convincing some of these governments that sometimes they do have the resources, but sometimes, and it's very human too, to be waiting for foreign aid, whereas they could start up and they could mobilize and they could even ask for some of that lab resources, for example, but as a lab, as examination, exploration, but themselves doing the investment. And so how do you see, I'm sure there is, lots of anecdotes, but as we are seeing, like I say, relatively more resources, but sometimes not put into IT or into development. How, what thoughts, from your long experience? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. That's a great question, and it is basically the gospel truth, I'll say. A country does not become self-reliant if it remains reliant on foreign assistance. The ultimate goal of USAID is really to work ourselves out of a job, to end the need for foreign assistance. And good leaders around the world do not, good leaders do not want their countries to be dependent on foreign assistance. So part of what we do is work with governments, work with universities, and really, more than anything probably, work with local private sectors to create that enabling environment for self-reliance. And whether that's working with women or religious and ethnic minorities or young people, it's with an eye toward these are critically important populations in countries to be included in a country's development plan. And absent those, you're going to be absent a lot of the good thinking and the good solutioning that is potential for every country. The US, as I said earlier, we're never going to have all of the money that's required to solve these development problems. And local investment is a critical component of local solutions. I think at a macro level, probably one of the best examples of this is the Vaccine Alliance called Gavi. The Gavi program provides funding for vaccinations throughout the world, particularly with a focus on lower middle income countries. But every country that receives funding from Gavi, with just a few exceptions, is required to put some of their own skin in the game. And they are required to invest some of their own money into the vaccine solution so that ultimately they'll work Gavi out of a job, so that ultimately they will be funding their own childhood vaccination programs. But in order to get the ball rolling, and in order for all of these countries to see the critical importance of childhood vaccinations, Gavi was an important structure to create. It's interesting to me, too, that the United States is not the major funder of Gavi. It came out of the UK as the primary funder. We're also not the secondary funder of it. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is. So we're a proud third in the Gavi Alliance, but it also is important for everyone to understand the US doesn't have to be at the forefront of everything. Local solutions or burden shared solutions are all highly appealing to us. And that, I think, is an important takeaway from this, that disrupting development is really about the wholesale definition of development and who plays a role in it and who are the ultimate end users and beneficiaries for future clients and customers. That's the entire community that's involved in development. So that's the role that everybody here plays. Your organizations and your companies are really important to realize that you're such an important component of enterprise-driven development, which is part of disrupting the entire environment. And we're grateful for it beyond measure.
That is amazing. Thank you very much for your time. I mean, I'm really inspired by this part of the session. I mean, I didn't know, we planned it briefly, but I mean, you were far better than I would have ever expected. I mean, that was really amazing. I mean, most of the things that she queued up here, I mean, are just incredible. So thank you very, very much for your participation. I know everybody in here shares my feelings that, we love hearing you speak. And have a great day, and thank you for your time.
You all too. Thank you very much.